The Thunder won the NBA championship, but that doesn't mean there aren't questions about the team, how it's going to look for the season, the fantasy value, and the big questions. We're going to answer them right now. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and get a whole lot more out of life. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms. So, we're talking Thunder. We're going to talk with Rylan Stiles of the Locked On Thunder podcast. So, you might as well just get cracking. Here he is, back on the show, fresh off a championship parade. Rylan Stiles is here to talk about the Oklahoma City Thunder. Rylan, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. I always love doing this every year.
Yeah, it's changed a lot, hasn't it? All of the discussions we've had about this team and dispelling some of the narratives around tanking and injuries and all that sort of stuff to the team that is now considered a powerhouse, and then having to deal with people talking about is it real basketball and what are they doing and where are they going from here, and they're going to have to move on from guys. It's all a constant, ever-changing landscape regarding this team in particular, but that's just how it is in the NBA. But the Thunder are the NBA champions, Rylan, and that gives a different set of challenges. So we might as well just get sort of straight into talking about some of those challenges for this upcoming season, because what changes? What's the mindset difference now with this squad? Because they did it. They're one of the youngest teams to ever do it. They did it in relatively dominating fashion throughout the regular season. There were some issues in the NBA playoffs, obviously a couple of game sevens, but they got the job done. So what happens now? What is the mindset change? Because you do it. Shai wins an MVP. You win the NBA Finals. You do it with this young team. You set yourself up for the long term. But how does that? Is there a drive change? Because it's very hard to repeat. So what do they do? What's different now?
Yeah, it's very hard to repeat, especially for a team that has built this entire system over the course of staying 0-0, as the Thunder always say, and having that intensity for all 82 games. They were only healthy for 8.5% of the games a year ago and still won 68 games because of that 0-0 mindset. And it's hard to dig into that once you have accomplished these big goals. But for the team aspect of it, I think that there's a area here where they are in a good position to not suffer a championship hangover because they're still so new to the scene. They still see in front of them an opportunity to become historic. And these guys are very open about talking about history, about talking about wanting to be among the all-time greats. And you can't do that with just one ring. And they all know that. And then you look and you break down this roster. Chet Holmgren won a championship and Chet Holmgren got paid this summer, but Chet Holmgren isn't in the discussions that he wants to be in right now, even after that title. So he has a lot to prove this season on an individual level. J-Dub made all NBA, but he still wants to climb these ranks as well. And you know that Shai's drive is also there. The interesting part about the Thunder is how much are they going to lean in to the developmental aspect of Nikola Topic, of Thomas Swarber. They still have this tightrope to walk of trying to pull the best out of those guys, pulling the best out of Cason Wallace, all while trying to win basketball games.
Well, that's one of the things that the people will ask that question. We're going to talk about that in the guards later on. Is how do you balance that? Obviously, we see teams that don't make the playoffs. Their season's done in April. This team played till the very last possible date on the NBA calendar, and they played it at high stress, high intensity games through to whatever it was, the 20th of June. So they've got a long time, and they want that sustained run. They want to make sure they're healthy and have that success. So, is there a change of mindset for this season? Because they are incredibly deep. I'm going to post this, and maybe my post will come out after I actually put this video up, but trying to say the Thunder's starting lineup, well, this is their projected starting lineup, but they're going to change that all the time. There's going to be 4 or 5 starting lineups that this team regularly uses because that's how deep they are. So we saw Shai win the MVP. We saw them win the title. Are they going to pull back on some of this stuff? They're not going to play them in these higher minute roles. We're going to have more of this idea of like the way Boston ran things where they just, okay, we're just going to sit guys more. And they did it a bit last season where it's like, okay, the entire starting five is out for this game and we give them that break. Are we going to see more of that, more management, more preservation of like, let's keep everyone healthy and not grind them into dust, which we've seen happen too, like a little bit to Boston. We've seen it happen to Denver after winning titles. Do you think that's going to be something that's more on the mind of Presti and Dagnott?
It's interesting because there's not a good baseline for this yet because of the injuries that they suffered a year ago. Chet missing half the year, Isaiah Hartenstein starting the year hurt, Jay Will, Kenrich Williams all starting the year hurt, and they blew so many teams out that a quarter of the team's fourth quarter, Shai didn't play a minute of. So that naturally kept his minute share down because of how good the team is. Now, can you expect to have the best point differential in NBA history again and thus artificially create ways to rest Shai? You can't bank on that. And I think that what you look at what the Thunder did last year, the only real crossover to have as a comparison for this season is whenever Cleveland was really pushing them for the top record in the NBA. And they didn't let that change the fact that they still wanted to rest guys. They even got investigated for resting guys against Portland in a game in which they still won the contest, but they didn't play a single soul because they did not want to value the minute work of that game whenever they knew they had a tougher matchup coming up. So they continue to run their own race and just be independent of the standings and like the win record and things like that. So I do think that you're going to see a situation unfold where perhaps on back-to-backs and 3-game and 4-night stints, you do lean into that depth more so than the starting lineup, because at the end of the day, this team wants to play until June again. And so they have to make the preparations to do so.
Yeah, and look, we saw it again. They blew out so many teams that these guys were still able to put up good numbers and huge numbers in these limited sort of situations. But also, like Rylan, you mentioned, they weren't healthy. Jalen Williams, not the center Jalen Williams, the other Jalen Williams was playing center. He was their starting center for a month, at least at the beginning of the season. And yeah, if you have the extra luxury of actually playing your real players, like your real centers, like could they have won by even more in that time and being even more able to sort of spread that load out? So if they have even, like, again, it's very easy to say they were so lucky injury-wise because in the playoffs, they were relatively healthy. Obviously, Jalen Williams had the wrist thing, but during the regular season, that wasn't the case. And they were in a situation where a bunch of guys were out, so they had to sort of mix and match their lineups. But if they don't get that sort of bad injury luck, especially to the bigs, they're going to be in a situation where it's more stacked and they're going to be able to pull guys back even further, I think, which I don't think is a way that people have necessarily viewed what happened last season.
Yeah, I mean, the injury luck for the Thunder, especially in the sense of like fantasy basketball, was not in their favor at all because of what they had to deal with really spread out throughout the season. The only player that they really had a plan for, that they were able to stick to that plan, was Alex Caruso, who they of course listed him with injuries, but he admitted himself in the finals that a lot of those injuries were just like, hey, let's not play Alex Caruso in this game because, as Caruso put it, they were saving him from himself because he can only play a very taxing style of basketball, and they knew that, so they didn't want to put him in harm's way for a relatively meaningless game and save him for the playoffs. So I do think that this year it's going to be so interesting to figure out where the Thunder sit, because on one hand, you want to be very cautious and say, yeah, 68 wins, like that's a lot of wins and it's hard to do that again. But they have so much depth that even if they did lean into resting Chet on back-to-backs and resting iHeart and resting Shai more, they're still deep enough to win against a lot of this league. And so how does that impact the Thunder's win total? And how does that impact the value of these players in the terms of fantasy? Yeah,
and we know that Dagnott, look, we saw there were times last season and the year before where he would just like, okay, one game it's Wiggins, and then it's Joe, and then it's Wallace, and then it's Caruso, then it's Hartenstein, and then let's repeat the cycle again. And then we'll just go through them and go through them and go through them. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that again because, like Dagnott even said this last season, hey, we're just trying things. We just need to see how, the reverse Tom Thibodeau, we need to see how certain situations look and how certain matchups look so that when we get to the situation in the playoffs where we need to go double big or we need to go small ball, we know how it works and we know what the best situations are. And they're probably going to be in a position again to do that this season and spread that stuff out. We're going to talk a little bit more specific about some of these players in a second when we come back. Before we do that, today's episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy, more specifically 5 Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings you the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink minus the alcohol alcohol into a quick and energizing shot. So whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, this one is a hole-in-one for your energy game. And sometimes on the course, you just don't have it. You might be full of energy at the start and then it tails off, and getting that 5-hour energy transfusion could be a great way to help keep the game fun, get that energy up. So whether it is that you're out there trying to score points with mates or just trying to get a PB and get your best record on the course, 5-hour energy can be your caddy, I guess, if you want to use golf parlance. So if you go to 5hourenergy.com today, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, you can use the promo code LOCKEDONGolf to receive 20% off your order. The offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. So whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost that you need to power through. Order transfusion flavored 5-hour energy shots today. Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about this squad and about some of the specifics around it, because that's what people are here for. We've got a couple of major things I think that need discussing on this team, and you touched on it already about the depth and about the arrival now of Nikola Topic. You've got Thomas Sorber, who didn't play in Summer League with the foot issue, and he's going to be mixed in. But there's AJ Mitchell, who was awesome in Summer League as well, and played minutes in the NBA Finals as a guy that started on a two-way contract. There's Cason Wallace, again, who's heading into year 3, which year 3, point guards, they're often ready to take over a team. I've put there on the question there, are they too stacked? Now, from a real-life perspective, you can never be too stacked. But in terms of all of these guys being able to actually get the minutes that they need, or to show, I guess, the value that they can and to spread their wings, it's really tough to see how that can happen, Rylan.
Yeah, it is tough. And I mean, like, part of this will just happen naturally through the course of the season whenever guys are dinged up a little bit and just when they need some breaks in the midst of a schedule. You look at how the NBA is set up now, we'll see it in August once the schedule's released here soon, that the NBA Cup's going to make it to where in January and February, you're going to be playing basically every day, and you just can't possibly put this team through that gauntlet. So the Thunder's depth will shine through there. I think with these three guys in particular, Cason Wallace is the very best bet to understand his role. He is going to play every single game that he's healthy and available for, and he's going to get a pretty good, decent share of the minutes. You could even see himself in the starting lineup. You saw them in the finals change their starting lineup to have him back in there. You saw in the Western Conference Finals, while he didn't necessarily start, of course, on the roll call, he did play starting level minutes instead of Isaiah Hartenstein, to where I think that you know that Cason Wallace is a massive part of the plan. Topic is interesting, but he has a lot of flaws that typically do not jive with Mark's philosophies. Now, how much do you need to bend on those philosophies whenever you're trying to develop him? So, for example, AJ Mitchell's a guy that, as a rookie last year, he was in the starting lineup, not starting lineup, he was in the rotation from game 1 up until he got hurt, and he was a staple of his rotation unexpectedly as a rookie. But it was because his ability to play defense and his flexibility offensively, where he could really thrive on the ball, he could really thrive off the ball. And those are areas that Mark really looks for. Mark doesn't like guys who can't defend. Topic, of course, no surprise to anyone, can't defend yet at an NBA level. He also can't play very well off the ball. He needs the ball in his hands. So if you're looking at what Mark's typically done, you would find it hard to believe that Topic is going to get meaningful minutes instead of just developmental minutes. But you, again, have to find ways to try to develop a number 12 overall pick who has so much talent that people believe he was a top 5 prospect in this draft.
How did you view his summer league? I watched some of his games in person. I'm not going to, the numbers of people watching are on the screen. He shot 21% from 3, which is very much not good. But 6 assists in a summer league game or in a summer league situation is solid. And I thought that his command on the court, given the players that were around him, again, all of this is context dependent, I thought he looked how I wanted him to look. Like, he was fine. Like, coming back off an ACL, he was doing the things that, like, you'd love him to shoot better, but I don't really care about those sort of things. I was happy with him in terms of, okay, he didn't look terrible. He did the things that I wanted him to do. But, like, how did you view his summer league, and did that change any opinions you have on Nikola Topic?
Yeah, the shooting is something that everyone's going to point to. To me, with guys like Topic, you don't even consider the shooting, because if he ever becomes a average to above average shooter, that's in and of itself going to be a developmental miracle, to where you can't bank on that ever happening, and you just have to take him for what he is. And what he was in Summer League was someone who was really good at getting downhill on the ball. I think he's already the Thunder's, at worst, second best passer in the sense of creating advantages. Isaiah Hartenstein's really the only guy who can throw players open and whip the ball across the court and find these windows for scores. Topic did that really well in Summer League, even with the talent around him, where he should have had more assists per game than he did in Summer League. And he got to the rim with his body very, very well. on the ball. So you can see the on-ball offensive role for him, which we saw the Thunder stagnate offensively in the half court in the postseason, largely because they didn't have a table setter like Topic. And then defensively, there's massive concerns. He played the passing lanes pretty well defensively to at least have some level of impact. And then you think to yourself and you wonder, well, what does this look like when he's flanked by 4 excellent defenders, which the Thunder can do with their bevy of defensive players in their rotation? So if he's playing at the NBA level, can you hide him more, or is he still just called the ball every single time and there's no getting around it? The Thunder are really good at jumping screens and not allowing mismatches. So can they hide him, so to say, on that defensive side of the floor? That's going to be a big deal in deciding if he can play high-level minutes for OKC. But he does add an element to the offense that they didn't have a year ago and haven't really had, this entire tenure for Mark and for the Thunder. So it's kind of a catch-22 of just, is the cost benefit going to be worth it to play Topic? Because you do have to change your offensive identity a little bit, because they do like all 5 guys to be able to play on and off the ball, and he's only really one-dimensional in that aspect. But I do think it's interesting.
That's the interesting part, because you're right. He is that sort of one-dimensional guy. The shooting's an issue, the defense is an issue. But like you said, the thing that this team doesn't have is passing. Like, it's not like a huge playmaking team. Shai is like whatever. Like, he's fine. Like, he's not really a point guard, like in that sort of passing sense. And Jalen Williams is fine. And Chet's not really a passer. And Lou Dort is not a passer at all. Like, they don't have like a passer, a guy that's incisive in that sort of way. But like, is that enough to like make that difference? And like I said earlier, they rotated so many guys through that starting lineup with Caruso in the playoffs, but like Hartenstein, Wiggins, Joe, Wallace, they can throw so many different guys into that group. Do you think that Topic will get into that mix, and not that Shai's playing off ball, but getting a different passing option into that group at times? Or do you think he'll strictly be held into that reserve role where let's put it this way, is he more likely to be a guy in a reserve role that sometimes doesn't play and is the 11th man, or be a guy that will occasionally fill in as a starter and be that 7th, 8th guy on a regular basis?
On that spectrum for this season, I would say he's more likely to be a reserve role that sometimes doesn't get into the lineup for OKC if they're facing a team that's really grindy and when you want to have a really big defensive unit on the floor. Of course, that's the biggest knock on Topic. I do think that there's a pathway for him to become a really solid bench player for them, even mixing him in to like the staggered lineups where he maybe comes in as early as like 7 minutes on the clock to just trying to ease the burden off of Shai. Because like you mentioned, like Shai and J-Dub and everything, not to discount their playmaking, but they're a one-read passer. Yeah. And Topic, he can not only keep the ball in rhythm of the offense, but he can create and improvise on the ball, and no one else on this roster can besides Isaiah Hartenstein, which does it at the center position, which is, of course, a very unique wrinkle and not quite one-to-one with what Topic can do on the ball, especially if Topic can get to the rim. And you saw Topic with Brandon Carlson that one game in Vegas where he actually had a center that could space the floor and have a presence at the rim. He was really, really good. And so what if that unlocks him to get more minutes because he's actually going to play with the center offensively the entire time with the actual Thunder? But of those 2 options for this season, I would say he's more likely to be one of those classic Mark rotational pieces that you want because whenever they do play, they put up numbers. But you also have to be skeptical of like, well, is this the game where they're just not going to play them, and they just have to wait it out and see in the sense of your lineups. But I think that long term, he's going to be able to be someone who you really, really, really want.
Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. You ever wish that managing your money felt easier? Well, with Monarch Money, it can. When you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you the full visibility and control over your finances. It's more than just a budgeting app, though. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. If you're sharing your finances with someone else, Monarch Money makes that easy. You can track all of your spending, all of your budgets in the one place amongst multiple people, so you know what your goals are and have that joint goal together. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That is monarchmoney.com. The code is LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. All right. That brings us, we've talked about the depth of guards. We talk about, I don't think there's a huge amount to talk about with Jalen Williams or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander necessarily or Lou Dort, but it brings me to this next part of this question, Rylan, and that is talking about the big men, because heading into the beginning of last season, we're like, okay, there's Chet, there's Hartenstein. They brought in Hartenstein and Caruso. Who's going to start? We don't know how they're going to work. How much double big are they going to do? And then from a fantasy point of view, it's like, okay, Chet, if he has to play next to Hartenstein, does it reduce his rebounds? Does it make him more perimeter? Does it change his block numbers? And of course, we just didn't see it. Like, we just didn't get to see this stuff because Hartenstein was injured in the preseason. Chet got injured immediately. They were sort of in and out, and took Chet forever to come back, and they were managing his minutes. In the playoffs, it's a completely different story. How much of this, do you think, okay, let's put it this way. Do you think the preference of Mark Dagnott is going double big? Do you think that is going to be his preference heading into the season with Hartenstein and Chet as the starting group? Not even say the majority of the time, but let's say like 40% of the time that's going to be the starting group that he goes for? Or do you think that when we saw some of those concerns crop up in the playoffs where they went away from Hartenstein in that group, we're going to see more of a traditional or a smaller lineup with Jalen Williams playing at the 4? How much of that Hartenstein, again, we didn't see a huge amount. We didn't get to see fully healthy guys working on that during the regular season. How much are we leaning into that this season?
So Mark is really good at sharing his philosophies on this stuff and, letting you understand to be able to answer questions like this about him. The caveat with the double big stuff is whenever Chet came back from the hip injury on February 7th, they were forced to play double bigs because they just had to know. Like, they had to know what it looks like because they just did not get the time. They were like two ships passing in the night, where as soon as Chet gets out, then 2 weeks later, Ihart comes back for the first time, and they just have never played together. And continuing that trend in the playoffs, you saw them keep the double bigs up until the finals in the starting lineup. And just from talking to Mark, I get the expectation that like the double big lineup will be their go-to starting lineup whenever everybody's healthy. And there's this kind of like background on Mark where he kind of believes that if you can get the best 5 players on your team on the floor, that's what you should do, and make it work somehow. And I think that those are your best 5 players in OKC. So I would expect the double bigs to be a staple for the Thunder and start the most games, while also, and everyone knows that Mark's not going to be tied to any one thing. So I would pencil it in for matchups like Dallas and matchups like Houston and Denver and teams like that. But I would not pencil it in whenever you're playing a guard-heavy team. He's not going to be afraid to start Cason Wallace in that role instead. I think that if you're looking at the Thunder starters, you have 4 that are absolute locked in. They're never going to come off the bench. And then you have the swing spot at the 5 spot being either Hartenstein or Cason Wallace. And I'd lean Hartenstein gets more of those opportunities than Cason does.
In the past few years, and this is just a slight sort of aside from this, like the Thunder drafted Jalen Williams and they drafted Cason Wallace the year after, and I said, okay, I believe that Jalen Williams would eventually replace Lou Dort, and of course he plays next to Lou Dort. And I said, I think Cason Wallace could be a Lou Dort replacement, and of course he plays next to Lou Dort. Is there any world in which we see a scenario where it's Wallace, Williams, and the double bigs, or is Lou Dort just so entrenched in that group?
So in terms of starting the game, I think that there's not a world in which Lou Dort will come off the bench. I think that those 4 guys of Dort, J-Dub, Shai, and Chet are entrenched in the starting lineup. But in terms of, okay, once you hit 7 minutes and Mark makes his first change, then who plays real like starting level minutes for this team, similar to what he did in the Western Conference Finals, where he started the double bigs. But if you really dug into the minute workload, the starting lineup or the top minute lineup was going to be the one with Cason Wallace in it instead of Isaiah Hartenstein. So there's a world in which Lou Dort could see games where the most played lineup doesn't include him and instead includes Cason and J-Dub next to each other. But I don't think that there's a world in which you'll see Lou Dort not be in the first 5. Back
to the bigs, people watching this on the video can see Chet played 27 minutes a night in the regular season last season, 32 games. So obviously he played those first few games, fractured the hip, and he was playing pretty well, came back, and then they eased him in. How much easing or workload reduction, given that Chet has had 1 incredibly healthy season and 2 disaster seasons from a health perspective? And they probably have the ability to go pretty easy on him. How aggressive will they be on that? Will they push him to 30? Will they keep him under 30? How safe will they play it, do you think, with Chet and his minutes?
Yeah, this is an interesting note here, and I just want to lay it all out there bluntly. As someone who has more knowledge than anyone about the Thunder, this is an area where you just don't really know. This is all guesswork with Chet in terms of his minutes, because with Chet, the sample size that we have right now is If he doesn't suffer a fluke freak accident injury, he plays 82 games. If he does suffer the fluke freak accident injury, he plays, of course, 30-something games or doesn't play at all in his rookie season. And the only cautious exercise that the Thunder have ever done is they ruled him out completely his first year after that Lisfranc fracture, and then this season they didn't play him on back-to-backs too much after the hip fracture. So we just don't know where it all levels off at right now. If you tell me that Chet does not get into a complete freak accident again, will he play 82 games? I think that that's a bit ambitious. I think that that's something where, like, you look at how they handled themselves in his first season actually playing, where they did get the 1 seed, but that was a 3-way tie 1 seed. Whereas this season, they get the 1 seed far and away, and they do rest all their guys for the last week or so of the season. I just think that Chet, by and large, if you're going to draft him in a fantasy perspective, you shouldn't be worried about the minutes, because he's one of those players that if he's healthy, you cannot keep him off the floor. He wants to play basketball more than anything in the world. He does not want to load manage. I think that the only thing you can be concerned about is back-to-backs, and perhaps he doesn't play in many back-to-backs or if any. But I think that ultimately, if I had to guess right now, he'll play in a reduced number of back-to-backs while not completely eliminating back-to-backs in his schedule. And you just kind of expect him to be playing at a 30-ish minutes per game number.
That brings us to the other member of the double bigs, because I don't think many people, Rylan, would realize that Isaiah Hartenstein played more minutes per game than Chet Holmgren last season. But obviously there are reasons, there are context parts behind that. Outside of freak situations, I don't think there's any shot that is something that happens this season. And everyone looks to the Thunder and the extensions given to Chet and to Jalen Williams, the drafting of Thomas Sorba, and they go, well, they cannot keep Isaiah Hartenstein long term. That's a general thought out in NBA Twitter sphere, media, whatever, right? Whether you agree with that part or not, that's beside the point here. Do you think there is any way? And I think the answer to this is absolutely no way. But do you think there is any way that they look at that and say, oh, maybe if we need something during the season, we actually move on in season from Isaiah Hartenstein and preempt that decision from the off season? Again, I think there's no way they do that. But given that potential specter of apron restrictions coming in the future, do you think that they could jump ahead of that move and try and improve the roster during the season by moving on from Hartenstein if Sorba shows, and obviously the other Jalen Williams is playing backup center too? Is that any possibility, or are people just sort of not even wish casting, but just saying, well, I guess it's got to happen, so it might as well happen now?
Yeah, I think that there's zero chance that it happens in the season. I think that the Isaiah Hartenstein decision is a big one. It's a tough one that has to be answered as soon as your season ends, whether that's after another championship or shorter than that. But it's not a decision for now until February. They're going to let this team fully run it back and fully give it their best shot to repeat. And Isaiah Hartenstein's a quintessential part in that, especially whenever you're looking around and seeing all the teams who it looks on paper as of this day that you're going to have to compete against to do so, like Houston, Denver, Cleveland. Like, all those matchups are matchups that are built for a guy like Isaiah Hartenstein. And you mentioned the Chet Holmgren aspect of it. There is an element of, well, just an insurance policy almost on Chet for this season, on his first year, fully back from that hip fracture that he returned from quicker than the team even expected him to last year. So it's great that Chet's able to come back and rehab very hard, but you do still want to be left with right now a core that can win a championship. And this guy offers you a security blanket that you can take into the summertime and either accept his option then and try to move on from him through the trade market. You can decline him and try to re-sign him to a team-friendly deal. You can do a multitude of things come the summer that I don't think are available to you right now in February, to where I don't see a world in which he's off of this roster, with the roster even getting more expensive. Okay, if you're going to have to make concessions on this team, then you might as well go for it all right now and make sure that you can win right now. Whereas you would hate to see a team that's only going to get more expensive and only going to have more obstacles to jump through to try to improve their roster, see a situation where, okay, you trade Isaiah Hartenstein in February and Chet goes down in March, and now this whole thing's ruined in terms of this season, whereas for a fact you can win a championship right now. You just did it with iHeart. So I think that you're going to keep around Isaiah Hartenstein until June at least.
I agree 100%. There's no chance to me that he is off this roster during the season. I think some people look at things and go, well, they're going to have to move on eventually. Might as well get something back. But I just don't think that that's the way that teams look, because yeah, so much changes in a 12-month period. Like, you have no idea what's going to happen with, like, who knows what Jalen Williams becomes, who knows what Thomas Sorber becomes, who knows what other things become available or what other teams become desperate in certain situations. So when you've got the team, like, yeah, Hartenstein could start and play 30 minutes for another team, and another team might value that and really want that. But, like, depth is important. Like, having good players is important, and we saw that with the way the Pacers played all through the playoffs. They put everyone out there, balls out all the time, put that pressure on, and it almost nabbed them a championship. And you're going to see more teams do that this season. Depth and strength of depth is going to become so important in the NBA over the next season or 2 seasons that if you've got good players and they only play 23 minutes a night, oh, well, that's maybe not great for their individual numbers, but it's good for your team. So teams aren't going to sacrifice that just so somebody can go out and play more minutes. They're going to be, it's like Alex Caruso. Could he play 29 minutes on a team like Chicago? Like, he literally did? Yeah. But who cares? Like, the Thunder have him. They play him when they need him. They use him in the right spots, and it makes their team better. So they've got 13 guys who could start for other teams. That just makes them very good, and they don't have a need to distribute those players around the league to give everyone a fair shot. Win the title and then figure it out later on. There's always something you can figure out later on when those questions come up. So while it is a common question that I've been asked, what do they do with Hartenstein? Who cares? Let's talk about that in August next season, Rylan, because it's just not going to be something I think that has any relevance during this season at all. And I'm glad that I am on the same page as you about that. This team is obviously entertaining. It was a fun season for you, and hopefully it's another fun one coming up. And all of the talk about the Thunder and all the problems that crop up with title defenses will be something that you cover over on the Locked On Thunder podcast, Rylan. So thanks again for coming on and talking to me about the Oklahoma City Thunder. And good luck for the upcoming season.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
It always is. Thanks, Rylan, again. All right. It was good to chat about Rylan, just dispelling some of those, I guess, concerns that people may have had about guys like Hartenstein and how, what the role of Nikola Topic is going to be. In essence, this team is going to be a lot of the same, just with more Chet and with more Hartenstein than what we saw last season, which suppresses the value of a lot of different guys. So just be aware of that. Also be aware that you can subscribe on this video. We're going to have more of these team previews coming. I'm recording another 3 of these tomorrow. We're going to be talking Pistons. We're going to be talking Warriors. We're going to be talking another team that I do not remember, but I'm sure we'll figure it out. Guys, hit the subscribe button, thumb it up, and we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.